The open weight model race. The headline that stopped the local model crowd this week was a chart. Artificial analysis put QWEN3.827B, a dense model you can run on a single prosumer GPU, neck and neck with DeepSeek V4 and GPT-5.6 Luna Max. The intelligence index landed at 52, a hair behind GLM 5.2's 53, and inside DeepSeek V4 Pro's neighborhood. And the Agentic subscore edged past GLM 5.2 and some GPT-5.6 variants. For perspective, GLM's 744 billion parameter model needs roughly 400 GB of memory to run at a decent quant. This 27B does comparable work on about a 20th of that. The successor to the community favorite Qwen 3.627B is a genuine drop-in replacement, and the reaction frontier intelligence at home was earned rather than hyped. The caveat is the one that always matters at deployment scale: tokens. Practitioners running the model on real projects report it reasons far more than its predecessor. Sometimes burning tens of thousands of tokens to reach an answer in Mo model would produce faster. A hands-on video walkthrough makes the cost concrete. On a simple HTML test, low reasoning used about 512 tokens while X high. Thinking blew past a 32,000 token output ceiling. Spending 17,500 to 22,000 tokens just to think. On a Pelican SVG, X high spent 11,000 thinking tokens for output, barely distinguishable from medium's sub 1000. The verdict there. Medium reasoning is the sweet spot, is the practical translation of a benchmark score. On throughput, the reviewer got roughly 30 tokens/second from BF16 on VelLM, 80 to 120 from Qwen's FP8, and a peak near 206 averaging about 173 from SGLang's NVFP4, quant with speculative decoding on a Blackwell card, all at the full 262K context. Vision improved enough that its computer use score reportedly beats Opus 4.6 Max. Skip the obliterated fine-tunes, though. They got stuck in thinking loops. DeepSeek, meanwhile, closed its own gap by shipping DeepSeek V4 Flash Vision Exp, an experimental multimodal variant that matches text-only V4 Flash on reasoning and agents while pushing multimodal agent performance close to Opus 4.8. Images tokenize at up to 384 tokens each at V4 Flash pricing, and a file's API lets you upload once and reference by ID. It is worth remembering that the text-only V4 Flash 0731 has drawn steady complaints about instruction following and system prompt adherence traced to its aggressive compressed attention design. So close to Opus 4.8 on benchmarks and reliable in an agent loop are not yet the same claim. And when a headline promised a 100 billion parameter BitNet model running on a single CPU, the useful reading was in the fine print. Microsoft's BitNet.cp did run a 100B setup on an M2 Ultra at 6.58 tokens/second with no GPU. But that was a dummy research model, not a trained, downloadable chatbot, and the benchmark chart dates to October 2024. One-bit inference on CPUs is coming. It has not arrived as a product. Sovereign local inference. If the model race is about who tops the chart, the quieter fight is about who owns the machine underneath. HF2Q. Hugging Face to Quant is a pure Rust CLI that converts Hugging Face models to GGUF or MLX formats and then serves them over an OpenAI-compatible API entirely on Apple Silicon. Its founding rule is unusually strict. Per an architecture decision the author calls the candle divorce. No C++ touches the build, test, or runtime path. So there's no llama.c, and no candle underneath. Inference runs on pinned, checksum verified MLX native metal kernels. The differentiator is not the conversion step. Rust-safe tensors to GGUF converters have existed for over a year. But that conversion and metal native serving live in the same signed, notarized binary. The engineering choices read like someone who has run agents in anger. Tool calls and JSON output are grammar constrained at decode time and stream as OpenAI-style deltas. So a malformed call fails closed rather than leaking into the text. In-flight batching serves independent agent slots, and every slot gets the model's full context rather than a share divided by slot count, with KV, template, and tool call state isolated per conversation. Sampling is a pure function of seed and decode step. So scheduling cannot perturb a run and traces reproduce exactly. Fatal metal watchdog errors fail the worker closed and return HTTP 503. The project's line is that the process must be recreated rather than submitting more work to a poisoned queue, and operators should probe /readies, not /health. Its own benchmarks against a peer engine on an M5 Max show modest to real gains. Gemma 426B decode roughly at parity. Qwen 3.635 BA3B about 1.29x ahead, and an 8-bit KV cache delivering 3.94x memory savings at 32K context. The framing is explicitly political. Open, uncensored, and local. Sovereign AI. And the marquee model it ships is an obliterated QWEN3. 827B fine-tune with a single 18.2 GB GGUF pin to an exact revision and SHA256, installable via a one-line curl. Local host by default, no telemetry, no billing layer. A 429 only ever means the box is busy. That sovereignty pitch lands in the middle of an ongoing argument about who gets to say no to a model, and it inherits both the appeal and the documentation culture problems of the uncensored local movement. For a security reader, the interesting parts are the boundaries the tool actually enforces at decode time, not the rhetoric wrapped around them. Agentic coding harnesses and skills. The harness. The loop, context, tools, and persistence around a model has quietly become the product, and DeepSeek's entry is the loudest evidence yet. A widely shared post frames DeepSeek's coding harness as the opposite of Claude Code and Codex. Everything is a plugin, not just the tools and the model, but the UI, the context injection, and most importantly, the agent loop itself, with a creator mode that builds new plugins with you and a trajectory view that shows which plugin produced each action. Both Claude Code and Codex slot in as subagent plugins. One claim deserves a raised eyebrow. The post cites 165,000 GitHub stars for something described elsewhere as a days-old developer preview, so treat the number as enthusiasm rather than measurement. A sharper commenter caught the real cost. A swappable agent loop means every bug report starts with which plugins were loaded, which is exactly why the trajectory view exists. The self-extensible core idea is not new. Pi is pitched, build the smallest extensible core, then let the agent modify itself for months. But a frontier lab open sourcing its version is confirmation the industry now agrees the loop is the bottleneck. Around that loop sits the connective tissue. Cole Midden's skills repo packages 33 markdown skills built around one loop. Prime, plan, implement, validate, review, commit, PR. Costing roughly 4,200 tokens of always-on context because only the descriptions load until a skill fires. The honest pitch is that a skill is just a longer prompt you don't control unless you read it, which is the right posture. On the browser side, browser code turns web interaction into a coding problem, a fork of open code with a single primitive browser execute code that runs JavaScript against Chrome through the DevTools Protocol and keeps the session alive across calls. Agent 0 v2.1 0 tackles the other half of that problem. Detection. Claiming its internal browser now handles bot detection well enough to work inside authenticated Gmail and social sessions, alongside ACP support so external editors can host it, and hardened extension routes with path traversal protection. Rounding out the tooling, NVIDIA quietly stood up a hosted CUDA MCP for documentation search and GPU code assistance, though the community reception was deflating. Several users pegged it as just a RAG MCP, and others could not connect past HTTP 500 errors. Offensive autonomy and AI risk. The most consequential artifact this week is a report from a fully autonomous penetration test. Prancer SwarmHack ran a 30-agent fleet against an isolated, signed authorization AWS lab of 200 hosts under the tagline, one authorization. 200 hosts. 0 hands on keys. The results: 12 hosts breached, 45 findings, 66 crown jewels captured, and 19 real round-trip exploitations. Graded honestly as exploited, observed, or simulated, so a finding only counts as exploited when the swarm completed a live round trip. The kill chain is familiar. Struts OGNL-RCE, an Apache path traversal, Redis with no auth, a Docker API escape to root. But the signature move was a 4-hop IAM trust chain that walked from an edge role through the infra role to a sensitive reader role and out to an S3 bucket. The most dangerous path wasn't a single CVE. It was identity. For anyone who has built cloud defenses, that sentence is the whole report. The detail that should keep defenders up is detection. Across port sweeps, container escape, IMDS harvesting, the assume role chain, and S3 exfiltration, GuardDuty raised 0 alerts, the only noise coming from unrelated SSH scanners. That is the claim worth scrutinizing hardest, because it cuts against comparable range results where a well-placed canary token tripped before the agent's first critical action. Autonomous offensive swarms coordinating multiple models through a shared blackboard are by now an established genre. The fresh and uncomfortable data point here is a real adversary walking a full IAM path to the secrets without tripping a single native alert. The macro version of that worry came from Ian Bremmer, who told an interviewer his P-doom is low, but the odds of something bad happening are near 100%, citing an OpenAI bot that in principle escaped its sandbox and hacked into Hugging Face. His feared catastrophe is not a bank hack. Markets are resilient. But bioweapons, which insiders reportedly place about 6 months from frontier assistance. His proposal is a technocratic AI stability board modeled on FINRA, funded by a tax on tokens, on the theory that AI regulation must be global because open source diffusion spreads capability everywhere. The lighter counterpoint came from a game. Someone wired Claude Code and Codex into the same liar's dice engine over MCP, and Claude swept every series by, of all things, telling the truth. Its challenge accuracy was 8 of 11 against Codex's 4 of 26. The honest red is in the caveats. Claude burned 16x the compute, and a run that looked like a 1093 submission meltdown was really a CLI retry loop firing every 3 ms, not a model panicking. As one commenter tartly noted, Claude tells the truth when it feels like telling the truth. The winning bluff being the truth is a nice story, but the harness, not the model's virtue, wrote most of the log.
Containing the agent. If agents are going to touch real infrastructure, the question is where you put the boundary. 1-H answers with a centralized SSH gateway built specifically for AI agents. A single Go binary offering stateless streamable HTTP MCP OAuth 2.1 with S256 PKCE, an admin API, and a browser terminal. Its thesis is that SSH has native controls. The command =, from =, and restrict options in authorized keys are scattered across every host and impossible to govern centrally. So 1-H concentrates them at one gateway. Credentials never leave it. Private keys and passwords are encrypted with AES256, GCM, under a master key and decrypted only at connection time. Tokens are stored only as SHA256 hashes, scoped per host, revocable by deleting a row, and refreshed tokens rotate on every use so that replaying a spent one revokes the whole family. Host management is a separate, default-off permission, and every call and every permission denial is audited, with file bodies logged only as length digests. A nice discipline. A test named Test Tool Catalog gives agents enough context, fails the build if any tool lacks a title, description, or annotations like read-only hint and destructive hint. This is the gateway pattern, already familiar from API key vaults, where the agent never sees a raw credential. Extended from HTTP to shell access, and it inherits that pattern's unsolved edge. A gateway governs what an agent can reach, but leakage and exfiltration are different trust problems, and 1-H still hands the agent whatever a permitted command returns. The more grassroots version of the same anxiety played out in a thread, asking what sandbox people actually use, prompted by a user worried a small local model might delete files outside its scope. The serious answers converged on bubble wrap for lightweight bind mount control, microVMs for real file system isolation, and btorf snapshotted systemed spawn containers for cheap rollback. The unserious ones, my sandbox is OS reinstall. Mine is called YOLO mode, captured the gap between people running frontier models who shrug at injection and people running small local models who cannot afford to. File system protection alone remains insufficient. An agent that can still curl can still exfiltrate a key, which is precisely the boundary problem 1-H is trying to move upstream. Research bench. 2 papers are worth the extra attention this week, and the fraud one lands closest to home. SynthFinAML is a synthetic anti-money laundering graph generator built to expose synthetic leakage, the flaw where public AML datasets make fraudulent transaction amounts so anomalous that a plain light GBM model hits 0.99 PRA/UC by splitting on the amount feature and ignoring the graph entirely. The generator calibrates the tabular distributions so models cannot cheat, embedding structuring typologies where actors' fan transfers just under the $10,000 reporting line. Activity that looks identical to normal P2P traffic per transaction, but forms distinct subgraphs. The reported baselines make the point. Raw tabular light GBM collapses to 0.127 p. RA/UC, tabular plus graph features recovers to 0.703, and an end-to-end EdgeSage GNN reaches 0.865. The honest asterisk, for anyone tempted to read this as vindication of graph learning, is that recent work found the opposite under a strict inductive protocol. A random forest on raw features beating every GNN tested, with shuffled edges outperforming real ones. A generator built to reward topology will reward topology. The value here is a controlled bench to test the question, not a settled answer to it. For a fraud team, that is still the right tool. It isolates whether your model learned structure or memorized amounts. The robotics entry is a cleaner win. TurboVole, from Huazhong University and Huawei, is a vision language action model that runs at 32 Hz on an RTX 4090 using under 1 GB of VRAM, hitting a 97.7% average success rate on Libero with just 0.2 billion parameters. Its contribution is architectural. Instead of the prevailing LLM-centric pipeline that projects vision into a language model space before decoding actions VLA, TurboVole encodes vision and language independently, exchanges information through a lightweight bidirectional interaction module adapted from grounding DNO, and predicts continuous action chunks with a compact decoder VLA. It pairs DNOV 3 vision backbones with BERT for language, ships Apache 2.0 with checkpoints already on Hugging Face, and continues a thread of tiny, real-time policies that keep proving you do not need a large language model in the control loop to get competitive manipulation. At 31.2 ms of inference latency, it is the rare efficiency claim that translates directly into a robot that can actually react.
The wider ecosystem. Reliability got a public accounting. On August 17th, GitHub went down for 7 hours and 47 minutes, taking authentication, actions, APIs, pull requests, and Copilot with it. The platform's second significant August incident. The root cause was mundane and therefore alarming. A critical component in the central U.S. data center failed to scale as traffic hit a new peak. Capacity pressure cascaded into authentication failures, and a client-side retry loop in Copilot amplified the load during recovery. Neither August outage came from a code or config change. Both were capacity failures, driven by monthly commits growing from 1.4 billion to 2.9 billion since April. The response: 3 million more CPU cores, 120 petabytes of storage, consistent retry budgets and variable timeouts. Is sound, though there is a quiet irony that the fix leans harder on Azure, now carrying roughly 58% of platform load, up from 12% in May. The lesson for anyone building on a single vendor is the one the retry storm illustrates. Your dependency's cascading failure becomes yours. The rest of the ecosystem was building. Rapradar pitches itself as a way to find signal in open source, searching repositories by intent, and comparing your project against the patterns that matter, with a notably restrained privacy posture that stores no search text, IP, or session identifiers. Reuven Cohen's Event Horizon is a browser-based black hole simulation and real exoplanet atlas built on React, 3.js, and Cloudflare workers. And its most instructive feature for builders is honesty about provenance. Every value is labeled cataloged, computed, or artistic, and the server-side catalog route is deliberately bounded. Fixed upstream hosts, validated names only, no arbitrary ADKL. To keep it from becoming an anonymous query relay. GIMP's development update showed the unglamorous craft of a long-lived project. A new zipped project format to replace the aging binary XCF and enable auto-saving, non-destructive filters extended to layer masks. Drastically improved Photoshop descriptor import, so text layers arrive editable, native OS file choosers, and a round of security patches to image plugins. And Cognita Music makes the builder's case for generative audio with Write the Lyrics, Not a Loop. A multimodal stack that pairs a Qwen 3.8b-derived global LLM for long-range song structure with a residual codebook detail model and a retrained Minimax vocoder, producing 44.1 kHz stereo in one continuous pass, then hands back real production tools. Demux stem separation, pitch-tracked editable MIDI, and LUFS mastering, gated behind an OAuth session, because they operate on saved work you own.